I have known our keynote speaker since she was in utero. And she comes from a great barbershop lineage of men's and women's barbershop singing, and at a very young age began to attend all the things. Barbershopper from infancy to today. She has been a music educator. She has been a chorus director. She's been an award-winning quartet singer. She's been a clinician at festivals as well as voice instructor. And most of all, she is a wife to Dan and a loving mom to Aiden, her beautiful son. And we'd love to welcome and ask you to give your attention now to my friend, Erin Odell Cook.
Thank you, Bill. I love you.
Love you too. Hello. Oh my goodness, thank you so much. I am really glad all of you could make it, because otherwise this would be awkward. But no, thank you so much. I am so honored to be here, especially following the names of Rick Taylor and Mo Field, and then who? But first I want to thank Bill Colosimo and Cheryl Berlin for asking me to be here. When Bill called me to ask, I was completely floored. And I must have been silent on the phone for a while because he said, well, I'm not hanging up until you say yes, because if you don't, we're going to make Tony do it. Yeah, nobody wants that. But I am so fortunate in that I know many of you here because, like Bill said, I grew up here. But there are plenty that I don't, because though I have grown, I grew up and have been very active in the Mid-Atlantic District, I've also been absent the majority of the past decade. And actually that absence is what I'm going to talk about today. I'm here to tell you the story about the healing process I went through following a severe traumatic brain injury, and how music and barbershop played a role in that process, and what I feel very fortunate to have learned and experienced because of it. I do want to take a second to relax, for us all to relax, because this story has some pretty dark spots in it. But I want to let you know right from the start that everything works out. Obviously, yeah, spoiler alert. Everything works out, and there are some really beautiful moments in the midst of it all, but we just may run the gamut emotionally. At least I know I will, and that's okay. Let's just go ahead and feel our feelings. There are some encouraging common threads that will pop up throughout this story. The first of them being, barbershoppers show up when you need them. And the second one, singing is healing. Those are both things that we all kind of already know, but it's cool to hear how they play out in real life because they're so easy to take for granted. But the main lesson that I learned and that I want to share with you isn't specific to barbershop, though it can certainly be applied. It's about playing the long game. In other words, working toward a goal, knowing it won't be reached immediately. Now, when playing the long game, 3 components are essential: a goal, a plan, and focus. Focus because there are going to be ups and downs. There are going to be steps forward, and there are most definitely going to be steps back. And there are going to be important breakthroughs along the way, but it's important to never lose sight of that final goal. Now, I use the words play and game, ironically, when I apply them to this story, because this was real life, and the stakes could not have been higher. On March 26th, 2012, I was hit by a drunk driver on I-95. It was a Monday night. My chorus, the Greater Richmond Chorus of Sweet Adelines, or GRC, as we affectionately call it, had a gig at a retirement home. We performed, had a rehearsal, and then I began an hour-long trek up I-95 from Richmond to Fredericksburg. This was a familiar drive because I was teaching high school choir and directing GRC in Richmond, and I was living in Fredericksburg with my grandparents. My mom, who sang in my chorus, was a few minutes, she was driving behind me and she was a few minutes back. The last thing I remember sometime during this mundane drive was saying a quick goodnight to my now husband, Dan, on the phone. He was living in St. Louis, and we were engaged at the time. The next thing I remember, my next memory, was approximately 10 days later. My mom was a few minutes behind me. Around 45 minutes into her drive, she hit traffic because there was an accident ahead. She called my cell just to double check. When there was no answer, she tried again. I don't know how many times she tried before the panic set in. She called Dan, my dad, had they heard from me. When it was finally her turn to pass the scene, she saw cars everywhere. But only one was smashed to the point that it was unrecognizable and had been spun around so that the headlights blinded approaching traffic, so she couldn't see in. But she knew. She drove the rest of the way to my grandparents' house to see if, by some miracle, I had made it home, while Dan in St. Louis and my dad in Northern Virginia frantically called the police. Unfortunately, it was them who found me. I was being taken to Mary Washington Hospital, and it wasn't good. I had a broken pelvis and a severe, life-threatening, traumatic brain injury. Now, of course, I didn't know it at the time, but I had been thrown into a fight for my life that would last the next 10 years. Not just about survival, though that was the first milestone to secure, but a fight for a return to the charmed, happy life I was so fortunate to be living before that awful night. I spent the next few days in the ICU in a medically induced coma. Because the brain is so complex, no two brain injuries are exactly alike. So there was no way to know ultimately how I was going to be affected in both the short and the long terms. But the prognosis wasn't positive for either at the time. But eventually it became clear that I would beat the odds and pull through. And then a few days later, I was allowed to regain consciousness. It would still be about a week before I was logging new memories, but I was breathing on my own, I was recognizing people, and I was able to talk. Sometimes a bit too well. Fun fact, apparently it's common for brain injury survivors to just completely lose their filter. And they don't end up having nice things to say with that filter removed. Basically, you know, like every single snarky thing you've ever thought but kept to yourself like a normal human in society. I know you have. I know. Well, I didn't have that ability. And on top of that, I had adopted a pretty unbecoming vocabulary. Yeah, we're laughing now. My friends who were there actually thought it was pretty entertaining at the time. My mom, probably not so much. But whatever. Important milestones were being reached, and it was at least amusing to those who were able to visit. My favorite story about that time actually sort of involves some music, and it's one that's language appropriate. So I'll go ahead and tell you that one. I'm not sure actually when in the timeline this was, because I wasn't making memories yet. I don't remember any of this. So it was at the point where I was still kind of in and out, like wake up, insult whoever was in the room, go back to sleep. My friend Cheryl was on Erin duty at the time, and she was the only one in the room. And this is how she told the story to me later. She goes, you were asleep, and suddenly you just sat up and you started conducting. I think you were conducting like a round or whatever you call it, because you turned to one side and you said, group 1. And then you turned a little more and you cued group 2, group 3, group 4, 5, 6, and then, a huge choir, I know, in my dreams, right? And then you got to group 7, group 7, group 7, and I said, Erin, there's nobody here. And then you said, you mean you waited until I got to group 7 to tell me there's nobody here? Yeah, right? Okay. But by the way, Cheryl and I have been friends our entire lives since we were babies, because our dads sang in a quartet together when we were babies. Anybody remember Alexandria's Ragtime Band? A few? Yeah. I mean, yeah, awesome. 80, what, Mike? 80 something? Right, he doesn't know. But talking about Cheryl being there brings me to one of the themes of this story, and that is barbershoppers show up. Because at the time of the accident, Cheryl was on a business trip in California, and my mom called her the very next morning to tell her. Cheryl immediately flew back, left the conference she was at that she had planned, that's her job to plan it, left it, came back, was by my side day in and day out the entire time I was in the hospital. Incredible. And my quartet was living in St. Louis, as I had been the year and 2 before. Well, not only did they get to my side within a week, but the 2 choruses we represented in St. Louis gave these college students money for gas and food so that they could drive halfway across the country just to see me. And I have Barbershop to thank for Dan, my incredible fiance, now husband of almost 10 years, who was also by my side within an instant from St. Louis. I didn't have the ability to appreciate it at the time, but I experienced a profound outpouring of love and support from my family, particularly my amazing parents, my friends, and even strangers. And all of those people, most of them are barbershoppers. I got cards, had visitors from all over, flowers, a complete set of Gas House Gang CDs. You know, the usual. That's actually true. Well, y'all know how word travels in barbershop, right? Well, when word got to Kip Buckner that I had lost my entire CD collection in the wreck, and that I was needing to hear, apparently, our Rough and Tumble best, well, he took care of that. Yeah, champs deliver. Because showing up to me doesn't have to mean actually physically being there. It can be as simple as a visit to the Caring Bridge site that my mom set up and updated every day. You all did that, wanting to see how I was doing, wanting to keep up with how I was doing. You visited that site over 18,500 times, and you left hundreds of messages. Friends, that is what barbershoppers do for each other. They show up when you need them. I needed that torrent of support, and you were there without me needing to ask. I am so incredibly grateful. Keep in mind that though I was several days into my journey at this point, I still had no idea I was on one. My first memory after the accident didn't come until the 10th day. It was while Casey and Heather from my quartet were visiting. I don't remember them arriving. I don't remember them hanging out in my room with me. I certainly don't remember all of the interesting things I said to them while they were there. My one and only memory came at the end. We were sitting outside after a meal, and we were singing a tag. It was Close Your Eyes and Sleep. I don't think it's a coincidence that the first notes I sang and the first chords we rang caused something in my broken brain to come back online enough to start making memories again. Because singing is healing. This was such an important breakthrough. What is a coincidence, however, was that we had a regional competition coming up in 3 weeks. So something else I don't remember about their visit was the conversation they had with me about Erin maybe possibly sitting out of contest just this year, or maybe have your mom sub in on baritone for you. Oh no. No, apparently I was having none of that. No, we were going to compete. So on April 11th, 16 days after the accident, I finally got to go home, and less than a week later, Casey, Heather, and Megan were back, this time to rehearse for the weekend. Yeah, quartet retreat weekend. Doesn't that sound ridiculous? No? Well, then you're as crazy as we are. And then less than a week after that, we headed to Greensboro, North Carolina. They from St. Louis, me from Richmond, to compete in the Region 14 competition. My quartet showed up for me 3 times in a month from halfway across the country. Going to regional just 1 month after a devastating injury, the thought of going, the prep, fulfilled me and gave me a reason to get better. Even though I don't remember having that thought. I was just obviously going, so of course I would be well enough to do it. And then the rest just took care of itself, at least on my end. But so much work and effort and sacrifice went into making that weekend happen. And I will be forever grateful to them for giving me that opportunity to overcome that initial terrifying month. That Friday night, my quartet wheeled me on stage. Dan brought out my walker, set it in front of me. I stood up, I still blew the pitch. I'm sure I insisted on it. What a jerk. And we sang. And speaking of regional, the quartet competition wasn't the only one I had been preparing for. That was also supposed to be the first time me directing the Greater Richmond Chorus in competition. Now, smarter minds and stronger wills prevailed on that one. I did not direct that weekend. But I believe the only reason that I was okay with that was because my good friend, Joe Cerruti, had already stepped up to help them before I was even capable of making decisions. So when you see Joe, make sure you give him a big high five for barbershop. Watching from the audience, tears rolling down my cheeks, I remember feeling energy I didn't have coursing through me. Because singing is healing even though I wasn't the one doing it. This chorus that I had poured my heart and soul into the past 9, now 10 months, were doing it for me. Side note here, to be honest, at this point, I thought the whole ordeal was almost over. But that's kind of the thing with brain injuries. A broken brain has no way of understanding how broken it is. For the next few years, I thought normal Erin was just around the corner. Just a few more weeks and I'd be back to living my best life again. So I still wasn't playing the long game yet. That is yet to come. But as that first summer came to a close, I decided I was doing great, thank you very much, and I was going to go back to my job teaching high school choir full time, and I was going to go back to throwing my full self back into leading GRC. Both of those things happened, but I was very much not doing great. I still needed help, a lot of it. Symptoms for brain injury survivors can vary greatly in number and severity, because like the injuries themselves, no two set of symptoms are exactly alike. I had too many symptoms to name, and several of them were becoming more and more debilitating. Fatigue, aphasia, absent seizures, depression, and intense and frequent panic attacks. The panic attacks were so frequent that I was measuring the time between them in minutes. They varied in severity and could be set off by anything, but at least twice a day, they were an event. I would collapse, I would scream, I would gasp for air, and then I would sob hysterically. I never knew when they were going to happen, and every single one was mortifying because I had absolutely no control. I dreaded every single step I had to take outside of my home because I never knew who I was going to humiliate myself in front of that day. But my chorus members were there. They put on an absolute clinic on showing up. That might be a good class for next year's Harmony College East, actually. They brought meals. They packed and moved me and Dan into and out of apartments and houses. They drove me to doctor appointments, and they even came to check on me on days that I was unfit to go to school, which were a lot. And through all of that, stayed committed to me as their director, even though I would need to take weeks, sometimes months off at a time. I am so grateful to those women. They were so dedicated to me, but I wasn't getting better. I was getting worse. Eventually, I realized that I wasn't capable of being the director they deserved anymore. And in February of 2014, I made the heartbreaking decision to resign. The quartet made it to the end of the year, but by November of 2014, I was barbershopping no longer. I continued to teach, but it was a nightmare. The thought just never crossed my mind that maybe I wasn't fit to be working at all, at least until just before Thanksgiving in November of 2015, when I realized I couldn't go to school one more day. Now I had to give up my students and the choral program that I had started from scratch, that I loved so much. And not only that, I had to give up the idea of being a functioning and contributing member of society. No job, no music, afraid or simply unable to leave the house. Whose life was this? Was I going to have to be completely taken care of for the rest of my life? Absolutely not. And I will not doom my family to that life either. At least that was the thought in my head anyway. Not one person in my family ever made me feel like I was a burden. But they didn't have to. They were 100% willing to do whatever I needed, but through absolutely no one's fault, I had become a responsibility. And it was then that I realized that my new full-time job was me. Because this is not me. This is not how my story turns out. It took 3.5 years, but I finally saw the long game I had to play. I had a clear goal, and now it was time to get to work. So for the next 4 years, every second of my life was spent focused on what I had to do to get better. But the tricky thing with that was I had no idea what I had to do. I mean, it's not like I wasn't trying to get better all along. I saw every doctor and tried every remedy that I and my family had ever heard of, but nothing was helping. So even though I had a clear goal and absolute focus, one key component was missing: a plan. I continued to get worse. By the end of 2016, I was only able to be out of bed about a total of 3 hours a day. And every day, my brain would become so fatigued that I would enter into states of catatonia, where I was unable to move or speak. And this was happening earlier and earlier every day. I was essentially fading away. Okay, I am now relieved to inform you that we have hit bottom. This is as bad as it gets, and we get to just go up from here. But there I was, fading away, as was the idea of this isn't me. How could it not? But here's the thing about hope. I didn't have it 100% of the time, not even close. And neither did any one member of my family or my friends. But there were enough of us that had it sometimes that was enough. So I never actually lost that hope, even if it wasn't always mine. I wasn't barbershopping anymore, but this community continued to show up for me. I can't say where I would have been without that support, because I never had to wonder where it was. Have I mentioned that I'm grateful? Those of you who know me know that it's really hard for me to give myself credit for anything. So this next part is even actually harder for me to talk about, because it feels so awkward, because no big thing is ever accomplished entirely by ourselves. But the goal was me, and no one could do it for me. Support, yes. Advise, yes. But I had to do the work, and I had to stay focused. And finally, in January of 2017, after 5 miserable years, I was finally given a plan. I heard about an intensive brain treatment and rehabilitation center in Asheville, North Carolina, and they specialized in traumatic brain injury. After speaking with Dr. Trayford on the phone for the first time, I realized this was it. I spent the next 3 years traveling to Asheville, where I would spend a week, sometimes 2 at a time, doing intense rehab at their center. And then when I was home, I spent literally every waking second doing the homework I was told would heal my brain. I was absolutely determined, absolutely committed, absolutely focused. Even if it didn't work, I was going to go to bed every single night knowing that I had done everything that I could. Because no one could do it for me. I changed everything about my life. On the advice of my doctor, I followed an extremely strict, personalized diet. I changed my sleep habits, my exercise habits, my water drinking habits, my screen time. I did meditation and brain timing exercises and physical therapy. And most importantly, over the course of 2 years, I weaned off of every single one of the many high-powered medications I had been prescribed to just basically prop me up all those years. Now, don't get me wrong, there were still huge ups and downs, but I managed to stay focused. I was starting from a place so far from my goal that I knew it would take a very long time. But I stuck to the plan, and sure enough, I began to climb out of the hole at last. The thing with a recovery like mine is that there's no technical finish line. You don't really know when you cross it because it happens so gradually. But in my particular story, there did happen to be a specific day that felt like Victory Day. This year on March 26th was the 10-year anniversary of the accident. It was a Saturday, and that weekend I was at the Mid-Atlantic Central and Southern Division contest in the pit, practice scoring the quartet contest as a music candidate for the first time. And then on Saturday, I had the honor of directing the Virginians in the chorus contest, marking the first time that I had directed a barbershop chorus in competition in 9 years. If ever there was a clear finish line, that was it. I was finally me again. It's still unreal to say it out loud, but I am completely symptom-free. 100% better. It took 10 years, but I finally won. Now, obviously, the stakes in this story are higher than most, but the lessons learned are definitely not too big to apply to other things in life. I feel like that's the point of going through it, to learn and to share. I think that's why I'm here right now. I think most of us have things that we want to accomplish in life that seem impossible because we don't know how to get there, or we expect results way too soon. But instead, if we can play the long game, establish a goal, develop a plan, and focus, we can achieve those things that matter greatly to us. I'm definitely not saying it's easy, but I am saying it's worth it. It's a lesson that I've already applied to new goals in my life because I have some catching up on living to do. One is to become a BHS music judge because it's one way that I can give back to the society and the people who have shown up for me. I'm so proud to say that I'm in my, we'll call it junior year of my candidacy in the music category. And the other goal, now that it's even an option, to be the very best mom I can be. In November 2020, Dan and I became parents to the most perfect little fourth generation barbershopper anyone could ask for. These are enormous goals, and the very minute I decided to go for them, I settled in to play the long game. In closing, this weekend at Harmony College East, we're here to learn more about this obsession called barbershop harmony, perhaps as part of a plan toward a goal of ours. And we're here to have an absolute blast doing it. Our shared passion for barbershop harmony is so powerful. Because of barbershop, we find ourselves in a community that shows up for each other. I think that's because the power of singing and harmonizing it's more than just entertaining. It's healing. And healing is something that we all need as often as we can get it because life can be rough. Now, my story is only the specifics are unique to me. We are all fighting battles in our lives, most of them invisible. But singing together is our way to heal. even if just for that moment. Well, friends, in this moment, we are here, and I am so grateful. Thank you.